If you study everyday life before central heating became common, one thing stands out immediately. People could not afford to waste heat. Coal, wood, peat, and labor were expensive. Bedrooms and windows were treated as systems that had to work together, not as decorative afterthoughts. What follows is a focused breakdown of window and bedroom practices used before 1950 that still reduce heating costs right now, without modern gimmicks or marketing language. These are methods tested over decades of cold winters, rationing, and real necessity. Heavy window treatments were designed to stop convection, not look pretty. Before mid-century design trends pushed bare windows, households understood that glass was a weak point. Single-pane windows allowed cold air to sink and warm air to drop toward the floor, creating constant circulation that stripped heat from the room. The solution was not thicker walls but layered window coverings that slowed air movement. Thick curtains were mounted tightly to the wall above the window frame and extended well below the sill. Many were lined with wool, flannel, or repurposed blankets. The goal was not insulation in the modern sense, but interruption of airflow. In practice, this meant closing curtains before dusk, not after the room cooled. Today, you can replicate this by hanging lined curtains that reach the floor and overlap the wall on both sides. Even modern blackout curtains work better when mounted wider and higher than the window itself, mimicking the old approach rather than hanging directly on the frame. Interior shutters and window boards turned weak glass into solid walls at night. In colder regions, especially in Europe and North America, interior shutters were common well into the early 20th century. These were not decorative plantation shutters, but solid wooden panels fitted tightly into window recesses. At night, they transformed a pane of glass into something closer to a wooden wall. Where shutters were too expensive, removable window boards were used. These were just simple wooden panels, sometimes padded with cloth or straw, inserted after dark and taken out in the morning. This practice, dramatically reduced heat loss during sleeping hours, when rooms didn't really need daylight anyway. A modern version can be made using rigid insulation board, cut to size and wrapped in fabric. Used only at night, this approach still outperforms a lot of modern window upgrades when it comes to cost versus effectiveness. Draft sealing relied on fabric, rope, and gravity rather than foam. Pre-1950 homes rarely had airtight construction, so draft control focused on stopping moving air rather than sealing up every gap for good. Rolled cloth draft snakes were placed along windowsills and floor edges. Rope caulking, made from twisted fibers soaked in wax or grease, was pressed into window gaps each winter and then removed in spring. These materials worked because they were flexible and reversible. They adapted to seasonal movement in wood frames without cracking, which is pretty clever when you think about it. Today, fabric draft blockers and removable rope caulk follow the same principle. The key is placement. Draft control was concentrated at the lower parts of windows where cold air entered, not just evenly around the frame. So, back in the day, bedrooms were treated as heat retention zones, not really as living spaces. Before central heating was a thing, bedrooms were intentionally kept colder than the common rooms, but they were designed, to trap body heat efficiently. The main goal wasn't to heat the whole room, but just to protect the sleeper. This distinction really matters because, modern heating systems assume a uniform room temperature, while historical practice focused on localized warmth. Beds were usually positioned away from exterior walls whenever possible. When that just wasn't possible, folks would put insulating layers behind the headboard, things like rugs, quilts, or even wooden panels. This helped reduce radiant heat loss from your body into the cold masonry or plaster. And, you can actually use this trick today by placing an insulating barrier between your bed and an exterior wall. Even something as simple as a folded wool blanket hung behind the headboard. Bed curtains, they created a microclimate that most modern bedrooms just ignore. Those curtains weren't just decorative antiques, they were practical, thermal tools. Four-poster beds with heavy curtains would reduce the air volume around the sleeper, letting body heat warm up that enclosed space pretty quickly. This, honestly, dramatically reduced the need to heat the entire room. Even simpler versions existed. Ceiling-mounted fabric panels or wall-hung curtains were drawn around the bed at night. This practice is documented well into the 1930s in colder working-class homes. A modern adaptation might involve a ceiling track curtain or even a heavy fabric canopy that can be drawn closed at night and opened during the day. The reduction in heating demand is immediate and measurable. Layered bedding compensated for unheated rooms without wasting fuel. Sheets and blankets before 1950 were designed wider than the mattress so they could be tucked tightly underneath. This prevented cold air from entering and kept heat trapped. Multiple thin layers were preferred over one thick covering because trapped air between layers provided better insulation. Today, many people unknowingly lose heat because modern bedding is undersized. A simple correction is to size up blankets and sheets so they can be fully tucked. Adding a wool blanket between sheets replicates a common pre-war practice and reduces the need for higher room temperatures. Floors and lower walls were treated as cold sinks that needed blocking. Cold air settles, and folks in pre-1950 households addressed this directly. Rugs were layered on bedroom floors, often with straw mats or felt underneath. And walls near the bed were covered with tapestries or thick fabric, not really for decoration, but to reduce radiant heat loss. In practical terms, placing a thick rug beside the bed and fabric on the wall behind it reduces the sensation of cold significantly. This lets you keep the thermostat lower without discomfort, just like they did about 100 years ago. Nighttime routines were synchronized with heat conservation. Heat-saving practices were just built right into the daily rhythm. Curtains were closed at sunset, shutters secured, drafts blocked, and beds prepared early so retained warmth was not lost. Bedrooms were sealed for the night and reopened in the morning. Applying this today means treating heat as something you preserve, not constantly replace. So, you want to close window coverings early, limit nighttime airflow, and reopen rooms strategically during daylight hours. These habits, well, they cost nothing and really do compound over time. None of these practices require historical reenactment or antique furniture. The principles remain valid because, honestly, physics has not changed. Air movement, radiant heat loss, and surface temperature still behave the same way they did in 1920. Focus on blocking convection at windows, reducing radiant loss near the bed, and shrinking the volume of air you heat while sleeping. Modern materials can substitute for historical ones, but honestly, placement and timing matter a whole lot more than just brand names. When these methods are applied consistently, they really do reduce heating demand without sacrificing comfort, just like they did before 1950. Now, why do these practices still matter for preparedness and resilience? Well, pre-1950 households just assumed fuel shortages, equipment failure, and harsh winters were normal conditions. These bedroom and window strategies, they were part of everyday resilience. For preppers and survivalists today, they offer low-tech, failure-proof ways to stay warm, even when there's an outage or you're facing fuel constraints. They also offer something that modern solutions often lack, and that's independence from supply chains, electricity, and specialized parts. Fabric, wood, and habit. Those are a heck of a lot harder to disrupt than systems. All right, just a few closing thoughts for you Warfield Prepper Chronicles viewers. If you found value in this breakdown, well, this channel exists for exactly this kind of grounded, usable historical knowledge. These methods aren't just nostalgia, they're proven solutions waiting to be reused. Go ahead and subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles for more deep dives into practical history that still works. And, share this episode with anyone who's serious about resilience, self-reliance, and learning from the past instead of reinventing it.